we can keep going. Arlene, do you want to introduce yourself? Am I pronouncing your name right?
I'm guessing you're talking about me.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm French, so yeah, no problem on the pronunciation.
Do you want to introduce your? Okay.
So I just got interested. I had some free time, quite some free time, and I wanted to build a system to make website. Started to review the language. Found Marko, found it to be the best, and so I'm the one who posted something about Glade.js. I'm
cool.
trying to build a system on top of Rollup, and then I can disappear. Anyway, I had some stuff to do. I'm trying to get back on it, and hopefully in a few months, maybe be ready to build websites. So I'm very interested in the future of Marko. That's all.
Cool, thank you. Ian, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name's Ian McBurney. I'm the tech lead for eBay UI and skin and accessibility, mind patterns, all those kind of things.
The design team at Kroger was just looking at the mind patterns, and we're resolving to steal most of your markup patterns for accessibility.
I like that. That's what it's there for. Which team are you from, sorry?
I work at Kroger. We're a Midwest corporation that you probably have shopped at one of the stores we own. I guess you guys would be Fry's. Is that a thing over there?
What's it called?
Yeah, there's Fry's here, yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
Fry's.
But you guys, I think in the Bay Area are also in the iron grip of Trader Joe's, so.
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's excellent.
All right, Gavin. Gavin, I think you're muted.
So you can tell I don't use Zoom often. So I'm a freelance designer / developer. I got interested in Marko when I was looking at trying to build web components, and when I compared the different frameworks that were there, it was the syntax which attracted me to it. So it seems the most natural, and I've just been interested in following it ever since, and I use it in my personal portfolio blog. That's it, really. Thanks.
Hey, June, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Jun, and I'm from eBay, and I'm from Trust Team Return. So basically, we do all the eBay returns, and currently we use Marko 4, and we just roll out the Marko 4 upgrade for returns.
Okay, cool. This list is moving around on me, I feel like. Martin, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hey, I'm Martin. I'm on eBay's transactions team. So we do basically mostly all the ways to buy, like placing a bid, placing an offer, commit to buy, add to cart. So we don't do the actual payments part, but we're kind of all the flows that precede actually paying.
Okay, cool. Max?
Yeah, hi, I'm Max McFerrin, front end on homepage, and I joined eBay recently, last October, and I'm still just getting to know everyone too, so it's good to see everyone. Thanks.
Michael?
Hey guys, I'm Mike Senlikowski. I'm a front-end developer at Buyer Experience, and been a long-time Marko fan. So it does some things for us that other frameworks just can't do. So.
Guess Abby, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Abby. I'm from eBay Germany, based in Berlin. So we're doing all the related to German products. I'm enthusiastic about everything front-end related. So playing around with Marko, React, Vue, and Flutter at the moment.
Cool. And then Timur, I think you're the last one unless someone's joined and come in since we started doing this.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Hey, I'm Tim. I'm from eBay Berlin, and well, currently I work on eBay UI components in React, but in the past I worked a lot with Marko, so I'm very interested in what's going on now.
Cool. All right, so just kind of a quick agenda as to, we actually had a lot of people join, so the introductions took a little bit, but we want to give you a little bit of an update on what we've done with Marko 5 and where we're going for the future. We're going to try to keep that pretty short because we do want this to be more interactive than us just presenting like information to you. And the other thing that we want to talk about is how to get the community more involved in what we're doing. And I think a big part of that is going to be what is the best mechanism for those of us who are kind of working on Marko full time to communicate what we're actually doing to everyone else so that you all can jump into things that you're interested in getting involved with. So let's, here, I realized I didn't send Dylan the agenda. Ideally, I would be sending this agenda to everyone probably. But Dylan, do you want to get started by talking about what we've done with Marko 5
Sure.
and kind of where we're at in that process?
Yeah, so I've talked a bit about Marko 5 in the Gitter. So if you're following sort of that, following along there, then you'll have some idea of what it does. But Marko 5 is currently out as a beta, is released under the Next flag, but we haven't been sort of promoting it on the website or really recommending people try it just yet because we actually need to update the website to take advantage of it. So that's something that's in our pipeline, and then we'll start sort of pushing it more and more. But to give you an idea, if you haven't heard at all about Marko 5, essentially what it is a rewrite of the Marko compiler using the same runtime, which is built on top of Babel. And so for the end user, what you're going to see is that you're able to use syntax that's newly added to Babel immediately within your Marko templates. So stuff like nullish coalescing, you'll be able to take advantage of right away. It also now has source maps, which is a thing that I've wanted to see for a very long time. And it also allows us to integrate better with a lot of the Babel ecosystem. So for example, one of the things that Babel has now is a built-in syntax extension for TypeScript. And so since this new Marko compiler is built on top of the Babel pipeline, you can actually just enable the TypeScript syntax and essentially use TypeScript in your Marko templates. It doesn't currently give you any sort of IntelliSense or anything in the editor, so that's stuff that we need to continue to flesh out, but it definitely gives us a path forward there. And then besides that, another big thing with the new compiler is that it allows us to have better static analysis of the JavaScript. So Babel has like all kinds of scope analysis stuff going on, so we can more reliably move things around, rename variables, and determine what variables are accessible and which scopes, which means we can do more advanced optimizations and whatnot. And then another piece, and we'll talk a bit more about this, is that there's now support for even more translators, which are basically the what Marko's outputting. So right now, you can have your Marko file compiled for the server side, which is going to be basically string concatenation outputting to a stream, and then also the VDOM output for the browser. But one of the things that we're working on, we'll talk a bit about in the future, is a new runtime that will eventually be Marko 6, but is basically designed to be a little bit more optimized than VDOM. And with the new compiler, you can actually hot swap out this translator and just say, basically, I want to use this new translator as a compiler option, and we can sort of switch between them. And that's also going to open the door for some other things that we want to do. Like if you want to have a translator for outputting a native web component or even a native React component, you could do that from a Marko template once those translators exist, and it's pretty easy to add new ones. So that's kind of the gist of Marko 5.
One thing I'll add to that, if you've been watching the Marko repo, you will have noticed that we have moved the directory structure, even in the master branch, which is still Marko 4, to a monorepo structure. And that's because the next branch actually does have multiple packages in the repo. The Marko package is now pretty much just the runtime. Plus there's some hooks into the compiler, and we eventually will probably move it out into a separate package, but the taglib loading is still in there as well. But the compiler is actually a separate package in Marko 5. But the reason that we did this is so that we can have a near one-to-one mapping between the Marko 4 branch and the Marko 5 branch. If you heard, there was a few people that mentioned the Marko 4 upgrade. So there are teams that are just getting onto Marko 4 at eBay. So there's definitely some challenges with a large organization getting everyone adopting things quickly. And so Marko 4 will probably be developing on that in parallel with Marko 5. They do share the same runtime. It's really just the compiler that is different between the two. So we've already cherry picked a number of commits, forward from the Marko 4 branch to the next branch. So that's just something to keep in mind.
I'll just add quick. There's also the Marko migrate tool. So if you haven't been following, one of the things we've done to Marko 4 is added this migration stage to the compiler, and in the Marko CLI tool, there's now a migrate command. So for a lot of deprecations that you see in your Marko templates, a lot of them will be flagged with a blue migrate message. That means that those features can be automatically migrated by the tool. And for the most part, anything that is needed to get you onto Marko 5, which does remove some deprecated features, can be done just by running the migrate tool. So essentially the upgrade path to Marko 5, unless you're doing something pretty obscure or relying on some weird aspect of the runtime, would just be running the migrate tool on your app and upgrading Marko and installing a new compiler package. But we'll outline what all of that looks like. But the upgrade path should be pretty straightforward.
And is that the plan going forward for major version updates now?
Yeah, so I mean, this is kind of the main issue I've seen with Marko 3 is it was quite a drastic departure when we went to Marko 4. So what we're doing with every new version that's coming out is we want to make sure that we look at it from a migration standpoint first and a compatibility standpoint. So with Marko 5, definitely the upgrade path should be super simple, maybe some minor tweaks, especially to config files and whatnot. So another thing I mentioned is that we're working on in tandem this new runtime that we'll talk a little bit about. So that runtime does have a significant number of breaking changes, but similar to what we've done with Marko 4, which has v3 compatibility, and we're going to add that to this new runtime as well. So you'll be able to run your existing Marko 4 components against this new runtime. And basically, we're only going to consider that to be the officially supported version of Marko once we have a very sane migration and compatibility setup available. So we're definitely looking at that as like a very high priority going forward.
So I'll talk a little bit about our kind of next API that we're looking at. So I guess in some ways we're kind of following the front end trend of moving away from component instances. And a lot of these ideas that we're looking at have been things that we've been thinking about for the past few years. So this isn't really anything new, although some of the specifics that we've landed on definitely have been influenced by recent developments in other front-end frameworks, within the past year or so. But one of the things that we've really wanted to do is to allow the template to be more of a source of truth of not just what the HTML looks like at any given time, but also how it can change and that kind of thing. And so we've got that somewhat with the embedding the class components into the Marko template with the class syntax rather than using a separate component JS. But we actually do want to allow more, I guess, fine-grained control over state and different lifecycle aspects. Part of this is from an optimization standpoint. This opens up the door for us to do additional optimizations due to static analysis. And part of this as well is we do think that co-locating this with the data that it controls is going to be a better API. You may want to break things out into smaller components perhaps, so that you don't have like everything all mingled together. But I do think this gives you a little bit more control as to where different parts of your application live. So with that in mind, we're looking at a componentless API. And what this is we're introducing a set of tags that will allow you to have the full expression of the class components without needing the class components, that these tags will actually provide data that you can manage. So the first stage of this has already kind of begun, and we have in our Marko tags repo, we recently introduced a state and effect tag. And so these actually are currently built on top of the class component API. But by creating this state tag, you get access to a state variable. You can use that in your template. You can write inline functions that mutate that state, and that'll cause your template to re-render. So that's one thing that we're working on. And then the effect similarly allows you to define life cycle type methods in your template rather than needing to do that in the separate class instance.
You think it's worth like sharing your screen and opening
yeah,
up the
maybe.
tags repo, maybe, or even just an editor to show an idea?
I was going to ask about that too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit vague. I think one of the main benefits we get from this approach of basically having tags to represent the different aspects of the component lifecycle is that you can better co-locate things like if you've got, let's say, a condition for, if some dialogue should show and you want to have some action that you perform once the DOM is there for that dialogue. So what you would do in a traditional Marko component is likely keep track of the input, and then basically in your component logic, you would say like, if this input show property is changing in my update lifecycle, then I'm going to read some stuff. But now you've got that condition for the show in the input in both the template logic and the component class logic. So by being able to co-locate these things, you can avoid having to duplicate that statement, but it also means that we can do stuff automatically, like cleaning up after that condition changed versus you having to check again in the on destroy, like, did the thing stop showing? Okay, now I need to remove this special logic. So the examples in this repo that Michael has up right now aren't the greatest, and this is by no means the final syntax. This is just more or less to get something out the door that more kind of works so that we can sort of see how it works in the real world. And we can talk a bit more about syntax in the future. But so this is showing state. So here you can see kind of, you can use the state tag and it's going to give you an identifier that you can mutate at any point, and it's going to update your template. So that gets rid of the Marko, this.state property. But effect is kind of more interesting, I think, if you go down. Is there an effect example? Okay. Yeah, so what's interesting about this, and the example doesn't really illustrate it here, is that so this effect can be embedded anywhere in your template. So like if you've got some if tag in your template, that effect is only going to run when that if statement is true. And then once that if statement is false, it's going to clean up, which is typically what you want. So like you could imagine if you had some kind of like jQuery widget or something like that you were using that you needed to initialize once a element is visible in the DOM based off of some conditions in your template. So you could set up an effect that grabs a reference to that element once the if statement's true. And then you can basically return a cleanup function here, which would clean up the jQuery select if it needed to get rid of some event handlers or whatever it was doing that needed to be cleaned up. But you can register all of that inline instead of having to repeat it, that condition, you'd have to repeat it normally in your template, in the on update lifecycle, and in the on destroy. So it makes it a lot less tedious to do the right thing as well, which is one of the reasons we like this API. Having said that, again, the effect syntax that we're using for these examples is not necessarily what the final syntax would look like. So I don't know if that makes sense.
That's definitely something that we would like some feedback on.
Yeah, I think
so
kind of reminds me of React Hook, right? This use
yeah,
effect
so
when
React hooks has definitely influenced this in some ways. One of the things that's slightly different about this, although React does have the ESLint fix now to somewhat automate it, but we're automatically tracking through static analysis the dependencies of these effects to know whether or not they should execute due to changes in input or state.
So for example, in the effect that you see on the screen right now, it is actually only ever going to run if input.value changes. If some other property on the input changes, that effect does not re-execute. So you don't have to do all of that plumbing yourself. It's kind of done automatically. So another thing that's kind of nice over the React side of things, but again, it is pretty similar and we want to go in that direction. But one thing that is kind of nice is that you can embed these lifecycle tags or state anywhere in your template, whereas in React, you have to have it at the top level. And I think that's actually super useful because one of the caveats of hooks, if you look on the React docs, is that you can't have a hook inside an if statement, right? Like as soon as you need to have an if statement, now you've got to create two components. And I think that's not the way that I like to develop. Like maybe two components is the right thing for a specific implementation or whatever, but when you're writing code, I think it's nice to be able to, get it done and then refactor it easily into what you want it to be. And with this API, you can go in fairly easily and copy this, like let's say the if statement. Now that logic got a little bit too complicated. We want to separate that out into another component. We can literally just copy that whole section, which has, the lifecycle state and everything that's related to it. And we just move that into another file. So refactoring also becomes quite a lot easier. So those are the two main benefits on the Marko side of things. But yeah, if you're familiar with hooks, then effectively you'd have the same sort of paradigms and whatnot.
Yeah, really the direction that we're going is that everything is driven by these tags. And part of what we're hoping to get from this too is userland tags that are doing some really neat things building on top of this. And that's a common kind of a occurrence, and it's something that people that are using Marko already feel comfortable with because that's how the core framework works as well. As everything's driven by these tags. So I guess let's jump. So, well, now you all can see here at the agenda. There's a couple of things that we're wanting to do around async await and errors, and we're getting into taking a little bit longer on this than I had hoped. So maybe we will skip over that for now and just mention Flirt really quickly. So there is some overhead in creating additional components for all kinds of things. And so one of the things that we're looking at for the future is this runtime that we're calling Flirt that's purpose-built for this componentless API. And one of the goals with that is to remove the abstraction tax of components so that introducing additional components into your tree doesn't have a noticeable impact on performance. And Abhi, you mentioned React hooks. And one of the reasons that React went in the direction of hooks is because there is this overhead associated with components, whereas hooks are able to be more lightweight and just handle that data kind of stuff. So we want to be able to do this all through components. And by removing that overhead of the components in this new runtime, we're hoping that we can have a consistent tag-based API for everything without that being a concern for the developer.
To give a more concrete example, like you could imagine if you've got a template that's rendering a whole bunch of rows in a table or something like that. If it's directly rendering those rows, it's going to output the string concatenation code of just like tr, td, whatever, and that string concatenation is going to be pretty fast. But as soon as you make that tr a component, now all of a sudden for each row, we've got to create a component instance, we've got to create the state instance, we've got to run all of the lifecycle methods. And so that's kind of the overhead that we're talking about. We want it to be just as fast to make it so that that row as a component was as fast pretty much as if you had inlined the row yourself. So that's one of the benefits of going this approach is we can, instead of having to create all these objects and run all of this lifecycle stuff, we can basically kind of create state on the fly sort of as you need it and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and Dylan mentioned that we're definitely going to have compatibility for the class style components that are already in Marko. And there's still a lot of unanswered questions around that. But basically, as we've built these state and effect tags on top of the current class component API, our plan is to turn around and build what will probably be like a component tag that we can automatically migrate to that'll provide the input state and component values to your template. So if you actually run it through the migrator, it'll insert this component tag with a pointer to your component.js or the component definition, the class definition that you had defined in your template. And then we will build the class component API on top of these new Flirt primitives is kind of our plan. So that's kind of an overview. We didn't go into a whole lot of detail about what we've been doing and kind of the direction that we're going. And we definitely want you all to get involved. And there's a lot more details that we do need to share with everyone about this. So one of the things that we want to open up is how can we communicate better? And we have a little bit of an idea of a plan. We'd really like to get feedback on this. So the first thing is that we're planning to create a new community repo under the Marko.js organization on GitHub. And that'll be a place where we can track meetings like this. So like in the future, this agenda that I have here in a Google Doc would be in an issue on that repo, and we would post the times there and maybe just share the issue in the Gitter channels and the Marko channel in order to let people know about that. We also want to track kind of the resolutions of that. And so we need to figure out so we haven't really taken any meeting notes during this meeting. I guess it's been mostly us presenting stuff so far. But if we're taking meeting notes, where do we want to store those? On the issues themselves that we're tracking the meeting, or do we want to have like a directory in this repo that contains the meeting notes? Would that be easier for people to browse through? And then on the proposal side of things, so there's a lot of things that are floating around in our heads, and we actually do have some gist floating around that could probably be turned into proposals as well. We'd like to have a little bit of a more formal process for sharing things before we actually build them, to get earlier feedback from people to see how that's going to affect the things that they're working on, as well as so you can just have a little bit of insight into what we're doing. And a lot of projects are doing this through PRs. There's also, I think it's PHP uses a wiki to track proposals, which doesn't give you a history, but it means that like anyone can just go in and edit it, which might also be a con. But so far, like Taylor's, we never even gave him permission to the Marko wiki on GitHub, and he's gone in and made like a ton of improvements there. So there are kind of some benefits to just like anyone can go in and change things. And then, yeah, so why don't we open this up? Does anyone have any experience with like this RFC process with any other communities, or any thoughts around really just how we can better communicate these things to you all?
There's more of an admin thing, but I don't know how people get on with Gitter, but it can be quite painful to use sometimes. That could potentially like be a bit of a friction for new users to kind of partake in the community.
We've briefly discussed moving the open chat to some other platform.
I think maybe we should create an issue for that. That could
Yeah.
be something that's useful, and we could see what people are interested in using instead of Gitter, because yeah, there's definitely some issues with Gitter. So that's a good call out.
And then in terms of RFCs, I don't actually have a lot of experience of contributing to them, but I know that Svelte uses them quite a lot, and they have issues which they create in GitHub, and the conversations which they have in their tool, in their community. They upload notes to it, and as a sort of observer, it's quite good to read through the notes and read through the discussions. So perhaps there's something we can learn from that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the direction we want to go, like especially for things that are going to be user facing, less so implementation details, I think. But as far as like these new component APIs, like what the final APIs are going to look like, I think we want to create some RFCs. I'm thinking the simplest thing is going to be just to create issues in a different repo, because we don't really want to have all of these issues in the Marko repo. Right now, it's kind of like a grab bag, and it's hard to tell what things are actually issues and what things are not. We've been trying to label them, but it's a little bit tricky to keep up with. So we kind of want to have proposals as sort of a separate thing. And we want these issues to be a little bit longer lived, and maybe have a bit more process around like how long we wait before we actually go ahead with an implementation and stuff like that. So does anyone have any concerns with us just creating an issue that would probably just be something like, here's a gist, here's the pros, here's the cons, what do you guys think? Can you think of more pros or cons, with this alternatives and that sort of thing?
I think I like that that idea to have RFC repo. For example, Vue.js, they have separate repo for RFC. So you can make an issue there, like proposing something, or you can make a pull request if you kind of like disagree. And I love to see all the heated debates there. It's kind of like enjoyable to see. I don't know why.
Yeah.
So, I mean, primarily, I mean, I think this will probably be helpful for us in keeping us honest with things. But for those of you, that are here, are these RFCs something that you think that you would actually get involved in, or at the very least, like read to see what's going on? Because we do want to make sure that, I mean, the primary reason that we're doing this is for you all to at the very least keep you updated on what's happening, but also give you a way to be more involved with the direction of things.
I expect I would probably read them. I don't know how active I'd be in contributing, but I'd at least read them.
Okay.
You've got at least one already that I could contribute with the explicit property declaration syntax.
Right. Yep. Yeah, there's quite a few things like that I think we really need to have a formalized, like, structured chat about. And another thing that's going to be nice about actually having issues related to these things is we could close them after we make a decision and know when things are kind of finalized and whatnot. So yeah, if any of you are aware of anything that you've kind of thought of, or even issues that you've created in the main Marko repo, it can be a little tricky for us to go through all the issues. Once we get this repo up, which I'm thinking we should be able to get done today, if you wanted to, help point out issues that could be moved over to this other repo and, kind of get these conversations started, I think that would be useful. And I think also, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, have you guys thought more about like in-depth training? I know you guys, your time is limited, but within eBay and outside eBay, having like a training course, I think would help adoption and correct usage. I know inside eBay, even there's teams that just don't seem to use Marko efficiently, and so could use some good in-depth training.
Yeah, so I definitely think we could have better learning material out there. I would really like for us to create some videos. I'm not sure if you all think that would be helpful, but that's something I thought, or at least for me, I know that video tutorials can be useful.
Yeah, I think video tutorials are great.
Yeah, we well, Patrick created years ago, early on, some video tutorials for Marko, and we actually got some pretty good feedback from people on those, but they're way out of date now and need to be updated. So that's something that we've talked about doing for a while, but that is something that we would really like to do. Or if anyone else is interested in putting together some training materials, that would be awesome. But we do, actually just recently, I got control back of the Marko YouTube channel, which we're live streaming this community meeting to now. So we're hoping to make some more usage of that channel as well to post some videos, screencasts, and that kind of thing.
Did you, on that note, you plan on providing some kind of what's the right word? Training around what is a componentless API? And maybe some people using eBay UI and thinking, componentless API, what does that mean? Do you plan on just providing some documentation around that?
Yeah, And I think that's one of the challenges too, and we need to be careful with this because we're kind of in this this state right now where the stable API and this component. So we've got this stable API that like everyone's using, and we probably do need some more learning materials even around this API. And then we've got this componentless API that we're working towards. And so there's definitely a part of me that's like, well, if we're going to spend the time doing it, should we do it for the new stuff? The new stuff isn't ready yet. So there's kind of this like, I don't know if it's exactly chicken and egg, but that kind of thing where the things that we're wanting to put effort into maybe aren't where we need to put that effort right now.
I was just going to say, yeah, I thought those videos that were made a little while ago were kind of like the thing that enabled me to become interested in Marko. I think without those, I don't think I would have been able to kind of see the qualities that it has to offer compared to other frameworks. One suggestion I thought with regards to, I think we could improve the community and the rate of which the kind of strength of the community if we can take advantage of the community in the things that people build with Marko and the things that they have to solve for. So a lot of the times we'll see in the Gitter chat that people have questions about how to do a certain thing. And all that knowledge is kind of buried inside Gitter and kind of lost. So perhaps it would be useful to have a place like a playground where you can view snippets, view code examples working. I think people really hit the ground running if they can practice with working examples.
Yeah.
So
that's really what we wanted the try online to be. And it's definitely not right now. One of the things that we've been, so we're currently in the process of, updating the website for Marko 5. And I think that's probably where we need to be spending a lot of our effort right now because it has the same component API and everything as Marko 4 as well. And that is, nearly ready to go. So I started working on the setup for the new try online, and definitely one of the things that we need to have with this is the ability to share snippets through that try online, so that you can actually code up an example and send it to someone easily. That's definitely something that's on our like required feature list for that.
Does that sound like it would sort of solve your problem, Gavin?
Yeah, I think because, I mean, this is a much more difficult problem to kind of fix for a sort of general user like me who, being more of a front-end developer, more of a like a visual designer, often I want to integrate a feature into my website which uses Marko, and there just aren't that many community-driven repos or projects that kind of solve that need. Like, say for example, maybe something that uses a content management system or some kind of shopping cart thing. And I think if you have something like a code playground where people can share snippets of code, then more people are likely to understand how to build it themselves, which would then lead on to potentially more projects being shared.
Okay. So you specifically are more interested in like integrations with, other tools that you might be using.
I am, but at the same time, I'm quite willing to kind of do some of the graft and try and figure it out myself. It's just that I don't have that level of knowledge, technical ability to kind of create it from scratch. So being able to see some snippets helps me in that regard.
Yeah. So one of the things that someone who they actually left eBay, but they added Marko integration to Code Sandbox. I'm not sure if that was super great, but that could be another thing that we start like looking at ourselves and making sure that it actually works properly. I mean, maybe that could allow for better code sharing. As far as the integration with other tools thing goes, that's definitely something that I've wanted to make sure that we're focusing on, specifically like actual tools like integrations with Babel, Jest, and testing library and a better Webpack setup. Like I've been trying to make sure that we're branching out, because previously Marko was pretty tied to the Lasso and eBay's ecosystem. So we're trying to expand that and roll up as well now. But I think maybe we could have better examples. I think this is actually a piece that's sort of missing from our current documentation. Maybe we should write this down. Is integrating with like third-party widgets or things that are mutating, the DOM. Like if you're going to install some third-party uploader tool or something like that, how do you integrate that into a Marko component? I'm not sure the documentation does a great job on that, but it is something that eventually everyone will have to sort of do, writing Marko components. So maybe that's a specific item.
On the examples front, so we've got the Marko.js samples organization, and we've recently decided that we're going to kind of deprecate that organization. We created an examples repo that's like a mono repo that contains a bunch of, basically we pulled the majority of the examples from that org into this repo. We're hoping that makes it easier for us to manage and keep things up to date, because that was a problem with the examples getting out of date. So I think that's still going to be a challenge as we want to show, integrations with these different things. I mean, there's a number of content management systems that it would be great to show examples with, and probably creating those examples doesn't take even a whole lot of time. That might be something we could do, but maintaining those and making sure that we're keeping that content management system up to date as it's evolving, and then as Marko's evolving, we're keeping things up to date. I want to make sure that we don't like bite off too much for us to chew, and that examples repo falls by the wayside. And maybe the thing there is that we could have, if you're contributing an example to that repo, some sort of level of commitment to help us keep that up to date, or something along those lines.
Yeah, definitely. I think you'd be surprised, if people would like to help. I think just have a bit of structure there and guidance to help people know what's the right things to do. Like, is there a specific format I should write the README file in? And yeah, I think people will naturally have a commitment to try and keep it up to date.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
We're just saying for community and participation of everything that was said. For the 2 or 3 video, I definitely saw that, and that got me interested in syntax also. So the videos are always good. And for components, I was thinking, I still haven't tried it, but there's an integration between Marko and Storybook. Anybody tried that to work on components? And
yeah, that is another one of the things that we recently invested time in. So now we have, basically we've taken over the Marko Storybook plugin. It used to be an individual contributor that wasn't working on Marko was maintaining that, but we've updated it to make sure that that integration is good, and also upgraded our Webpack setup a lot. So as long as you're using Webpack, really using Storybook for your components is pretty straightforward now.
And if you want to see an open source example of that, if you go to eBay's GitHub and then the eBay UI core repo, those are the eBay themed components that we're using, and there is Storybook set up for that, and there's a link there to actually go view the live Storybook for those components. So that is something we're making use of. at eBay.
Yeah, one thing I will add just about that is that with Lasso, any of you who've used Lasso have probably seen the browser JSON files. Those browser JSON files do not work natively in Webpack, which is what Storybook is using. So there is a sort of half-baked Webpack plugin browser JSON that is maintained in the Lasso org. So you can kind of use browser JSONs in a limited capacity in Storybook, but it's not something that's going to have like robust support anytime soon. So that's kind of one thing. Even if you are using Lasso, a lot of cases in Marko 4, dependencies are going to automatically be discovered, like the style dot whatever file and the component.js file. Those are automatically discovered for you. And so there is a limited need for browser JSON files. If you can sort of get rid of those, you'll definitely be better posed to take advantage of these other tools that are reliant on Webpack. Yeah.
And other than that, for a repo on RFCs, I would definitely be interested in participating also. And and for components, I don't know if someone mentioned it at some point. It'd be nice if there was a central repository of Marko components where you can see them, see what they do, see the npm package, install it.
Yeah, that is actually something that we wanted to work on before. The project kind of turned into something else entirely and has a little bit gone to the wayside. But maybe as things start to, as we get more community involvement, we could revisit that. Essentially, what we wanted to have is a project where essentially it would scan npm for changes, and then anytime a package was published with like Marko components in the keywords, then it would automatically sort of download that and do a build of it and make that available. So that is something we could revisit at some point. I think maybe even if we could do it in a static way somehow might be tricky, but having at least a link to that on the website could be kind of useful as well. So another thing that is kind of in our pipeline that we haven't really talked about because we haven't decided when we're going to do this, but we've wanted to have better like primitive components around accessibility for a while. And so that's another suite of components that we want to have sort of available for doing things like, the common patterns for like dialogues and like capturing the keyboard and all that sort of thing. So components that have those sort of things built in that are sort of independent of any design system or whatnot. So that's another thing that's coming out. But yeah, I do think that's a good idea. It is something we want to see. Hopefully, we can get that out. Yeah. Is there anything from anyone else, or did you have another comment or question or anything like that?
No? I have just a question about the Beautify format tool which you have for Marko. I don't know if it's if it's possible to suggest maybe like some updates, kind of compared with other formatters in Marko code. It can be quite like it removes all the spaces and can sometimes split things onto like a lot of lines. I mean, I kind of get by, but I just wonder if there are more people interested in Marko that might sort of take them by surprise if it doesn't feel as natural as it should. So I just wondered if that was still if there's still an opportunity to update that.
There definitely is, and actually that pretty print tool is a big piece of the migration stuff that we've been talking about, because essentially our migration tool parses the Marko template, has an AST, we make some migration related changes to the AST, and then we print that back out using the formatter tool. So we definitely like for the format to be better. But one of the things that I've really wanted to do, and I'm not entirely sure what the level of effort is for this, but is to actually have an official Marko plugin for Prettier. because I think they have a lot of same defaults, especially around the HTML formatting and the way they've got it set up. You can actually reuse a lot of that stuff. So I was kind of hoping that we could have a bit of a back and forth so that we would pretty print the Marko specific syntax, but defer a lot of it to a standard HTML pretty printer. That is definitely something that I would like to see. And if anyone is interested in working on a Marko prettier integration, I'd definitely be happy to help as well.
Yeah, and we are already using Prettier for to pretty print the JavaScript parts, the JavaScript expressions in the template, but we definitely want to take that further. And we're thinking that using Babel's AST format should make that easier as well to integrate with Prettier, but we have not explored that fully to figure out if that's actually going to be the case.
If I have to leave soon, I just wanted to talk about something that's been touched on. This might be interesting for Taylor. Taylor mentioned that he's wanting to use the same markup that the Mind Patterns has. Accessibility has been mentioned, components have been mentioned, a component library, the community. So one thing that's doable. So we have eBay UI, which is a component library built in Marko. It's kind of themed and styled with Skin. Now Skin is it's also based on that same markup from the Mind Patterns, but Skin is very eBay, it follows the eBay design system. But the way that Skin is decoupled from the component library, eBay UI, means that potentially, we can drop in any other Skin, any other CSS framework that kind of complies to the same, let's call it an interface, the same HTML markup. So, I mean, we could potentially, for people like Taylor, rather than everyone recreating their own combo box or menu tabs, whatever, have a core library that can be styled in different ways and uses that good markup, has the accessibility behaviors that we've talked about. So I think that's potentially something that could be really strong for the community of Marko. I don't know if you had any thoughts about that, Michael and Dylan.
I mean,
we
talked about this offline some, and I definitely think that's something that could be very helpful. And it seems like the Mind Patterns do have some pull in the open source community. Taylor's not the first person outside of eBay that I've heard mention the Mind Patterns. And so I almost wonder if that's something that we could use as the, because you're saying Skin styles those Mind Patterns essentially, right?
Yeah.
And so if we could use that as a base, and maybe, I don't know that we necessarily want to maintain it, but if we could create, like a material skin or something, on top of that, so we have this kind of way to swap out between those two design systems and kind of a guideline, an example for others of how to integrate, like Kroger's design system or whatever. I think that would be,
yeah.
So one concern I had was that, like, right now Skin has a bunch of classes, obviously in BEM, and maybe those classes are specific to Skin's design, so they're not going to be useful in any other design system. So you've kind of got these arbitrary additional classes that might be on some of the markup, which bloats it a little bit. So that was one concern I had. I was wondering if maybe it might even make sense to have like a set of components that just implement the Mind Patterns and only have styles that are specifically related to implementing those Mind Patterns. And then maybe even eBay UI could be built on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, we can maybe go through that offline, but generally we try to avoid that in Skin, or any kind of classes that are very specific to eBay or our design system.
Well, I just mean even stuff like, so with the button, you've got, the primary and secondary and stuff like that, but maybe your design system doesn't operate that way. So there's a few things that I feel like might be a little bit extra.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we can try and kind of normalize or, smooth those out as much as possible. Totally agree. Although I do find that in most design systems, there is the concept of a primary button, a secondary button.
Yeah, that was just the first example that
Yeah.
came to mind, but I assume there's maybe other things. Like even with the dialogue, we've got some stuff like because of how it displays, we've got to, you know, add different classes, and because of the animations that are used, we've got some other classes, but maybe those are useful in a generic context.
The good thing, perhaps people in this chat that aren't aware that a lot of these patterns are, you know, it's almost like an abstraction on top of the WCAG ARIA authoring practices. You know, a lot of this built, you know, we're really using those practices to guide a lot of how we go, and we align pretty closely with those patterns. Dialogues is a good example.
Yeah.
Just even for something as trivial as that button class name example, the Kroger design system unfortunately was started by somebody with a bad case of not invented here. So we do have primary and secondary buttons, but they're not called that. I'd tell you what they would be called, but you would laugh.
So do you think, Taylor, that something like just a very base level implementation of the mind patterns with only styles that are relevant to the mind patterns would be useful?
I don't know if it would be useful for us, if only because while our client-facing moneymaker is just a React app and we could easily integrate whatever you do that way, the Kroger design system actually serves a lot of very weird masters. And so as a result, they have a very idiosyncratic starting point for all of the components that then turns to iOS and Android and Angular and some other stuff that, you know, legacy code bases. Though
are you saying there's like inconsistency in terms of the markup that's there, or just the styles that are applied, or?
Both. For example, one of them uses web components, and the problem with web components is they all have wrapper host elements. So our CSS has to be written to account for just basically just meaningless spans being littered throughout the markup. I'm not thrilled with it, but it's the way it is, and I'm not on that team anymore, so I can't influence it even if I wanted to. So I think it's a good idea. We won't be able to use it, but I did realize that you were talking about maybe with very basic styles that are almost required. With CSS custom properties nowadays, you could even have it so those things wouldn't be, you know, possible deal breakers or specificity nightmares.
And that's the direction we're moving in. Like as we speak, I'm starting to, you know, integrate CSS variables, custom properties into Skin. But I don't even think we need any. I mean, it could be 0 styles. That's a potential as well. Just 0 styles. It's literally more of just of an interface of classes. Anyway, I don't want to derail this too much with talk about Skin and stuff. You can get back to Marko.
Interesting thing, though. I think it would be useful. So, cool. Is there anything from anyone else? Do we have anything else on the agenda that we wanted to talk about, Michael? I know we're kind of over time now, but
the syntax was one that we were gonna mention, but probably
so maybe we could
we can create an issue about that.
We could create an issue about it. We could talk about it if anyone wants to stay around for it, but you're more than welcome to drop off now, obviously.
And then the last thing is that we are hiring for a full-time position on the eBay UI team, which does include working on Marko. So if you have any interest in working on Marko full-time, Ian, do we have that rec open yet? Oh, Ian dropped off.
Okay. Well, if once we do get the rec, we can share that in the Gitter if anyone is interested in that. The only thing is, our understanding right now is that you have to be located in the US, but remote is an option as far as I'm aware.
I mean, right now, remote is the only option.
Yes, yes, it is. But full-time, indefinitely remote is an option. Cool.
All right. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the live stream and then